Class, MASH. By Anutty. Chapter 91, Preparations. The topic went into how to achieve level 100, and MASH was a bit surprised to receive any guidance. He had been left alone for the levels so far and was surprised to get the information. However, the information had answered many questions for MASH, especially as to why there weren't that many powerhouses around. There were only two known methods to reach the next rank, and that was to kill a person at that rank in single combat, or to clear a dungeon of that rank single-handedly. Doing dungeons above your rank was considered impossible, so killing someone of the higher rank was a much more feasible method. That also explained why so many never got to that level. Many people completely give up on the struggle, if they knew that this was one of the requirements. Each person to make it to that rank would have needed to accomplish one of the two tasks, so killing them sounded just as impossible as the task itself. This wasn't limited to silver rank though, and there was another requirement needed for the rank after. Jack couldn't tell MASH of that requirement but told him that he would find out after getting to the next rank. MASH found it reassuring to hear Jack talk about it like a foregone conclusion. However, Jack did allude to the requirement likely being the same at level 200. However, that was speculation on his part, as only the guild master had the information. MASH could only grunt in response to that, surprised to hear that even Jack hadn't been told everything. Assuming it was the same condition, who would MASH have to kill to achieve that level? Thinking about who qualified for that, he realized the list was very small. Other than the kingdom's leaders, there were only two others he knew of that were at that level. One was known to have fought a demon, and the other was the one who killed it. Both were heroes, even if they didn't have the class for it, and no kingdom would dare to touch them. If anyone so much as tried to kill them, they would be branded as traitors of humanity. The gods might be at that level, but he realized he wasn't certain about that either. All of that was a problem for the future, and a distant one at that. Wait, what did that mean about Red's family? If one of her ancestors killed a king, then shouldn't they have reached that level? How did the rest of her family even manage to kill someone like that, and did that mean that someone in her family was level 200? MASH felt like that story didn't make much sense anymore and made a note to ask her about it. Hopefully, she would be willing to share. His thoughts moved from that to the other high-leveled people he had met, and he thought about what they must have done to reach that level. Alex was there, and so was Arthur now. Then it hit MASH. Arthur had to have killed a person at that level to reach the next rank. Even if that was a dungeon, he hadn't entered alone. At first, MASH assumed that his brother had killed the boss single-handedly, but Jack had specified that it needed to be a person. This meant that his brother must have killed another human being, and there shouldn't have been many in the dungeon. He would ask him about it, sure that Arthur wouldn't lie to him. This line of thought did lead him to ask another question. When do knights find out about this? Jack only shrugged his shoulders from the other side of the table, indicating that he had no idea. Well, he could find that out from Arthur too. Honestly, MASH still had a few things he was confused about but didn't know what questions to ask. He needed time to process the information and tried excusing himself. I'm going to head home for today. I'll have some questions for next time. Sure, but your tournament fight is in 2 days, don't forget. Jack responded casually, but MASH stared at him with some confusion. Shouldn't it have been next week? Glaring at Jack, MASH spoke, not hiding the anger in his tone. He wasn't ready for a fight and wouldn't be in 2 days. He needed time to acclimate to his new class and still needed to do a lot of research. Not to mention, he needed to visit the Colosseum too. Somehow, it seemed like he was getting busier. You ranked up, and those matches start sooner. No worries though, your first fight shouldn't be too difficult. All MASH could do was sigh when he heard Jack's words. They weren't all that reassuring, but he guessed that Jack was a pretty good judge of strength. If he thought that MASH would have an easy time, then he would believe so. Plus, he had planned to make his opening fight a spectacle by revealing his lightning magic. It was uncommon magic like his wood was. Any magic that was not of the most basic elements were considered uncommon at the least. The conversation died after that bit of information, and MASH decided to push back his visit to the library until after the tournament. He needed to do some preparations. He didn't linger in the guild, nor did he move leisurely in returning home. Running through the streets was not very difficult. Honestly, MASH expected to bother people as he ran, but with his draconic domain, he could easily avoid crashing into people. Several people had been startled when he ran by, but MASH didn't collide with anyone. Hearing a few people throw curses at him was a new experience, as most of the time, People wouldn't even speak to him. Once he arrived, he immediately checked with the head butler to see if his brother was back. He still hadn't returned, so Mash went to the training grounds first. There were so many things about his skills that he needed to test and eagerly ran into the space. First, he needed to understand the changes to his wooden creations and his efficacy with lightning magic. Subconsciously, Mash had expected to receive a lightning magic skill. Instead, he got a combination skill of his two magics. He formed his usual weapon from the new type of wood. The wood was a dark brown, and the light hitting it seemed to give it a whitish outline. Mash could feel the wood vibrate a tiny bit in his hand. It was such a small motion that he would only feel it if he was focusing on it. Next, he channeled a small bit of lightning through the wood. He held the weapon out in front of him, still unsure of how resistant his body was now. The lightning didn't escape the weapon violently, cascading off the blade into small strands that struck everything around it. He had never seen anything like it, and even when a few of the strands lanced towards his body, he didn't feel any pain when they struck. It seemed like his affinity and resistance had gone up significantly. However, he knew that this was only a small part of what he could do. He could feel the lightning within the wood and felt a connection to it like the wood. The connection wasn't as complete as the one with his wood, but he was able to manipulate the lightning slightly. Pushing the lightning to the tip of his weapon, it shone with a pulsing light. Finally, he released it, trying again to form a single bolt rather than the branching storm he usually made. It didn't work, and the shape he imagined broke after only a few feet, turning into a branching tree of light. Finding himself able to look upon the sight, told him that his eyes had also adjusted to the magic. Even though it still hurt his eyes a little, it was a beautiful sight. The image only lasted for a fraction of a second, but it had truly looked like a tree of pure light. That was only one aspect of his new abilities though, and he moved to test lightning in its raw form. Raising his empty hand towards the opposite wall, he tried to form lightning and hold it in place. That was another failure, as the lightning immediately branched outwards, launched like a projectile in front of him. He was surprised at the power though, as it rivaled what he needed Priscilla for in the past. He guessed that opening a fight with that would also end those fights. It seemed like his lightning capabilities were much improved, and he finally let Priscilla help. Through the bond, he had felt her desire grow as she saw how much stronger he had gotten. Ever since his class upgrade, she wanted him to truly test the bounds of their combination. She had been patient though and gave Mash the time he needed to rest and deal with things. So, he gave in to her desires and let her guide him like before. Go ahead, we'll try all the things you want. Finally. As soon as the message entered his mind, outlines for different types of magic sprung forth at extreme rates. This was more than she had been able to manage before. Significantly more, and he asked her about it. Did you get stronger too? No, but I have more access to my original power. During your evolution, I managed to siphon off some of that power to finish another body, that plus the improvements to your mana have changed a lot. Mash could somehow feel a grin as she finished her explanation, and he didn't hesitate any longer. He was curious to see what she had planned. The first thing he noticed was that she started forming replicas of herself again, not as many and not as large either. She filled them with some lightning before disconnecting and letting them move about like living creatures. The inherent life of Priscilla's wooden clones was probably the strangest aspect of his new abilities. When this had happened before, Mash tested it with other animals and found that it didn't work. He realized this likely only worked due to Thunderwood imitation. Somehow that skill replicated Priscilla's old abilities, and the wooden copies he made were connected to him like her extra bodies were. The creations spread out from him, and he realized that the range of his control was immense. After they got a decent distance away from him, each fired a miniature version of the attack he used earlier. The power was clearly lower, but it would be more than capable of stunning most monsters. Considering these creations, he bet that each was several times stronger than the fire ants he fought before. And to think that in a prolonged fight he could have dozens, maybe even hundreds, of larger versions rampaging in a fight. Truly a one-man army. Priscilla wasn't done with that and formed two unique outlines in front of him. The first fired directly from his hands. Raising his hands in front of him, he followed the complex outline. It was something she hadn't done before and had a lot of his energy colliding with one another after a short distance. As he activated the magic, several bolts of lightning shot from each of his hands, but instead of branching into a tree, the two bolts collided with another after a short distance. The resounding explosion lashed out at everything, striking his wooden creations as well as everything in the room. The resulting explosion hit him too and launched him backward. However, he was more bothered by the heat than the force, and it felt like his skin had started burning. What was that? Mash sent the message dazedly, still confused by what had just happened. It had been a powerful explosion. The force didn't form a crater, instead, it melted the ground around its center. Priscilla didn't reply right away, seeming to bask in the power she had helped make. That was one of my most powerful skills in the past, though your power was still lacking. Her response was filled with pride and smugness, and Mash was left wondering what the full attack would have been like. She didn't send him an image though, instead of saying it was something he would need to earn. Rolling his eyes, he moved on. There was still one more thing he needed to test today. Today, he would become a dragon. Chapter 92, Dragon Form. Mash was eager for this next part and eagerly made his way back to the center of the training grounds. The explosion had pushed him away, mostly because of his own body's reaction. As soon as the wave of heat had hit him, Mash had jumped backward instinctively. Although considering his new stats, he doubted the heat could have seriously damaged him. He started the transformation even before arriving at the center. There was no reason to wait for that long. Mash considered the gargantuan dragon that he saw, its image was still vivid within his mind. Even after everything he'd seen, that being stood out for him. The creature's presence had frozen him in awe, and he could do nothing more than stare at it as if it were a god. Mash hoped to meet a real god one day, but mainly because he wanted to compare them to some of the grand beings he had met. It wasn't that uncommon with the year ending soon. Usually, a god will appear to start the new year, and that would kick off the festival. Mash had heard about the grand celebrations of the capital, even as a young child. He didn't know what to focus on for the transformation but held the dragon's image in his mind. He wouldn't make it as large, both because he didn't have the energy for that, and it was simply too large. If he did manage to make something of that size, then he would destroy the entire city simply by existing here. Destroying the city was not in his plans. So he aimed to make it as large as he could, while still being able to move within the training grounds. Instantly he noticed the biggest difference of this transformation. It didn't start at a single point, but rather encompassed him completely, tearing his clothes apart as the wood expanded around him. Mash was surprised when he was able to see through the wood as if the eyes on the imitation had become his own. He realized what the skill did now. It was literally changing him into his creation. Before he knew it, he felt his head collide with the ceiling above. Looking around he realized that he towered over the grounds like a small giant. He doubted that Luke could match his size, although Mash also noticed that the shape wasn't perfect. It didn't match with the behemoth he saw earlier and guessed that it was closer to whatever he had consumed. Two long arms stretched down from his torso to the floor, and shorter hind legs let him stand as a human would. His scales were a dark shade of blue, but it was clearly still blue. Turning his head to look behind him, he saw a long tail that ended in a sharp point but could only barely see it underneath his wings. Long full wings, stretched out behind, getting partially squished by the ceiling above. The ceiling above was a real problem, as Mash had grown far too large for this space. It wasn't like he could leave without destroying the house either. Plus, he didn't have the energy to make another imitation and decided to bend over so that he could fit a little better. Mash felt the power in his body and guessed that the energy consumption must be incomprehensible. Checking his reserves, he realized that after the initial transformation, he was expending a lot less energy now. In fact, it was far more efficient than his draconic transformation from before. What if he combined the two transformations? He was curious but didn't do it immediately, instead opting to test out the capabilities of this form. The first thing he tried was to grow an extra limb, curious to see how it would feel. It felt like his old creations had, not like the full body experience of the imitation skill. Next, he tried to manipulate the form of the wooden imitation, like trying to grow one hand to be larger than the rest. It did grow a little, but it felt like he was adding something to his arm, instead of growing his arm to be larger. Finally, he tested whether he could feel pain or not. If he could, he wasn't sure how much of an upgrade the skill was. He tried something simple, punching his hand into the ground. The force of swing was immense, and he left a crater in the ground as he lifted his hand. He hadn't even swung with much force, only wanting to test his senses. The power behind the swing showed him that there were no light swings in this form. There was a muted sensation of pain, although it did seem reduced. His form head could still feel pain, but it was significantly diminished. Although, that could be because of the stat improvements in his items, and the inhumanity skill evolving. The other thing to test was his lightning magic, though he didn't know what to do about that. Assuming that his physical body was the origin, how would he funnel the magic out from the body? He remembered Priscilla's attack though and figured he could manage the same feat in this form. So, he opened his now draconic mouth, getting a feel for the large, spiked teeth that he had gained. He tried funneling his lightning magic through his throat, treating his physical body as the core for the spell. Surprisingly, he could feel it working. It was a lot faster than he expected, and a blast of lightning shot out from his mouth. It shot forward without breaking apart and branching like his other attacks. It actually maintained its shape as it lanced between his mouth and a training dummy on the opposite wall. The training dummy was decimated by the force, and the bolt rolled onto the wall behind it. When it collided with the wall, an explosion occurred, much like Priscilla's attack had when they fought. It seemed like he could finally replicate that attack. However, this was not the limit of his new power. He could take it one step further but would run out of energy quickly. Still, he tested it, transforming into his dragon form within the imitation. The imitation reacted, the scales darkening to the black shade of his transformation, and they grew thicker too. Mash didn't have much time like this and settled for 2 attacks. One was simple as he slammed his tail into the ground behind him. The force of his blow caused the ground to tremble, and he was certain that the people in the nearby streets would experience it too. He didn't have the time to check the damage though and fired another lightning attack into the ground in front of him. He didn't dare aim this at the walls, thinking he might collapse the house if he did. However, he quickly regretted shooting it at the floor. The light exploded from his mouth, melting the ground beneath him. Even the strands that lanced out from the impact with the ground burned the ground as they struck. They even managed to damage him through the thickened scales, and it felt like he swam through boiling water. The pain he felt was small compared to the sound the attack gave off. The thunder that followed sounded like the roar of an enormous beast, and it was so loud it felt like it would be heard around the world. The attack had somehow expended all of his energy too, and he was stuck within the imitation. Mash could still feel his ears ringing from the roar that followed the attack. Maybe, it wasn't the best idea to try that. He could picture the people in the city panicking at the sudden shaking of the earth, followed by the roar of a great being. What about the people within the house? He could picture himself getting lectured, and he found himself sighing as he remained stuck in the imitation. Mash was surprised to feel connected to the wood still, though his physical transformation had ended. It seemed like once the imitation was made, it would become his body until he separated from it. He couldn't move through but was happy to notice that he could breathe and see through the imitation. He was definitely too eager to try the skill, as he didn't even consider whether he could breathe while within the creation. It would have been foolish to suffocate while within his own magic. Mash was stuck laying on the ground, his long wooden arms sprawled out in front of him. He hadn't noticed how long his neck was until he realized that his head just barely reached past his arms. It was strange to have the body of a dragon but lie on the ground like a tired child. His friends walked down and were clearly startled by the dragon in the training grounds. Jill even went so far as to teleport away, much to Mash's amusement. He decided it was time to give talking a try and tried muttering a greeting to them. "Hello." It worked but his voice was altered as it echoed within the wooden creation before leaving his mouth. It boomed outwards, some of the echoes still chasing it as he spoke. It was an entirely inhuman sound that matched much more with the world carrier. Mash could only grin as his friends seemed even more amazed by the transformation. Jill reappeared quickly, a glare pointed at Mash as she realized what had happened. Mash rolled his eyes and wished he could have seen the gesture himself. "This is incredible, are those scales real?" Red sounded very excited and quickly ran over to the side of his hand. He could feel it as she rubbed her hand against the wooden scales. Red started shaking her head, as she continued to grope his scales. The others were equally curious and before long they were all rubbing the scales on his face. She continued as she moved around the body. "It feels like it's alive, but also like it's made of wood." Mash did not like being referred to as it. Finally, he regained enough energy to try and dismiss the imitation skill. To his surprise, it didn't remain like his wooden creations but decayed around him until it crumbled into small pieces. The others stared at him for a second, before turning their head abruptly. He didn't have to look down to remember that he was naked. Quickly donning a spare pair of clothes, he realized he would need to buy a new set of mending clothes. His clothes had torn apart, and while the mending clothes would eventually restore themselves, it would take a few days with the amount of damage done. Plus, he needed to look for the biggest pieces. Well, he was thoroughly embarrassed, but clearly, the others were as well. All of their faces were marked by red cheeks, though he guessed that his face was similarly flushed. They all seemed eager to move on, and it was Luna who tried to change the subject. So, what were you doing? You do realize that starting a citywide panic is not a good thing. Mash could only grunt in response, as he had no excuse or justification. Instead, he simply explained what he was doing, and some of the conversations he had had with Jack. He didn't tell them everything, as he knew that would only get them in trouble. Mainly he talked about the tournament change, and how he felt like he needed to test some of his abilities. That didn't appease them though, as his actions were certain to cause a storm of trouble for everyone. And that was discounting the people outside who were preparing for an attack that would never come. He ended up spending the rest of the night talking with the others, glad that he wasn't alone. The others hopefully felt the same, as the events from earlier in the day likely still weighed on them. Luna seemed the happiest to talk, and everyone was content to listen to her stories. She prattled on and on about her time in the capital, and about the parties and events she took part in. Even getting them all to promise to go with her to some party at the end of the year. It was coming up soon, only 2 weeks left before the end. Chapter 93, Separate Paths. The next morning Mash had planned to visit the library and Colosseum, but both of those options ended up falling through. His ruckus last night had caused quite the commotion, and it seemed like the city was having a late start today. Mash felt bad about that, but that wasn't what kept him locked up inside. He had actually gone outside earlier today but returned after a short escapade. There were a lot more eyes on him and his friends. The events of the past day had been made public to a degree, and the people were treating their group as young heroes. Each look made Mash's gut churn, and he returned home quickly as it became too difficult. Mash didn't know if it was the looks themselves, or the fact that they were missing a large part of what he did. They didn't know about what he needed to do to get the people out, and instead just heard that their family was responsible for saving hundreds of people. It was a large reduction of the events, and Mash knew that if they truly understood what had taken place, they would not be looking at him with admiration. Furthermore, his ruckus from last night had forced his brother to stay out last night, and that only made Mash feel worse. So, he sat inside the training ground just getting a better feel for using his new Thunderwood. It was mainly using it without his transformation skills, relying instead on the creation skill itself. He wasn't expecting any stat gains and was unsurprised to see any changes in his abilities. Keeping up the act of training, he had been visited by his friends once. They had arrived early in the morning and said they were going to visit one of the dungeons today and probably tomorrow too. One of the city's dungeons was for their rank, and he would not be able to enter it anymore. Thus, they decided that the three of them would enter and return before the tournament started. They weren't planning on clearing it but would try if they thought it was easy. Mash hoped that they succeeded, as that would let him enter the other dungeon sooner. At first, Mash had been a bit worried for them, but after reading up on the dungeon he realized that it should be fairly easy for them. The biggest enemies were these hybrid creatures, which were a mix of birds and bears. Though it was a low magic dungeon, they could easily overpower the creatures with magic. It was a lot harder for classes that were low on magic, but still on the easier side of dungeons. There was some time variation but in the reverse of their previous experience. They would be able to spend almost an entire week in the dungeon before returning, and he figured they would have reached his level before the tournament. Honestly, he wasn't sure though, as the last dungeon had given them levels far too easily. Mash left it to them, giving them the key his brother had handed him earlier. Speaking of which, a servant had come down and Mash looked at her with trepidation. Honestly, his presence within the house had not grown much better even after yesterday's events came out, and he had made it significantly worse through his training last night. So, he was surprised to see one for the maids head towards him. "Your brother has arrived." She yelled the words, her voice breaking a little as Mash started to run towards her. Mash had stressed the importance that he is informed of his brother's arrival and was glad to see that they were taking it seriously. The maid had spoken informally to him, but he realized he much preferred it that way and made a note to tell the butler to allow them to talk that way. Mash ran towards the main hall at first but guessed that he was already speaking with Luna somewhere. Instead, he stopped one of the staff and asked the man where his siblings were. The man quickly led him towards a smaller room on the second floor. Mash hadn't been in there before, but he did see his siblings sitting inside when he opened the door. The mana in the door and walls of the room told him that it was meant for important discussions and was designed similarly to the appraisal room in the guild. On the inside, there was a table big enough to fit 5 or 6 people around its circular top. Mash took a seat beside his siblings, a bit surprised to see that Luna was wearing the clothes she slept in. They were extremely big and made of thick cotton. It looked like it would keep her warm through a snowstorm, and he wondered how she managed to sleep in that. Originally, he planned on bombarding his brother with questions, but seeing his sister in the room caused him to hesitate. "Don't worry. I got permission to inform Luna of most of what you have learned." Arthur spoke, reading the expression on Mash's face. Mash only stared, wondering how he got permission for something like that, but decided that was unimportant. He wanted to ask him about the dungeons. What was the situation with the dungeons? "We got levels quickly while inside, and it was clearly unnatural." His brother nodded as Mash spoke. Thankfully, his brother actually had some answers for him. "The dungeon was made by the creatures inside. I believe you fought one of the higher beings, and I fought the supposed mother and father. They were the creators from what I could guess. However, that's not what you're really asking about." His brother let out a long sigh, taking a big sip from his tea before continuing. "Well, you're right, the class system was giving us a lot of bonuses while inside. After having a discussion with my superiors, I learned that this was the method the knights used to gain high-leveled combatants. Unnatural dungeons are a foreign group of invaders, and the class system is designed to combat such forces. So, when we were fighting within such a dungeon, it was giving us bonuses to incentivize killing the beings, though we didn't need encouragement for those things." His brother finished and seemed to wait for Mash's response. Luna seemed content with listening for now, and an angry-looking Alex was glaring at Arthur. Apparently, she didn't like the fact that Luna was finding this information out. However, Mash realized something from his brother's response. Arthur knew that the class system was created by whoever owned this world. Thinking back, Mash realized that the Vice Guild Master didn't know. His lectures made that obvious. Mash thought about what to ask his brother about, but held himself back as he noticed the look on his brother's face. He looked tired, and clearly showed signs of distress. They were subtle, and he doubted that anyone other than Mash or Luna could see them. Mash changed his question while speaking. "Why, are you doing all right?" His brother looked at the two of them for a moment, before asking Alex to leave. At first, she looked like she was going to protest, but a single look around the room got her to leave. She was probably just waiting outside, but it was enough, and Arthur shared his experience in the dungeon. Mash felt his insides turn as his assumptions were confirmed. His brother had needed to kill one of the knights to reach the next rank, and Mash shared his own experience and the people he killed. They talked like that for a while, finding a small amount of comfort in sharing their experiences with one another. Jill's P.O.V. The dungeon was not what they expected, and they had two reasons for the inconvenience. It wasn't made harder, instead, the opposite had occurred. They ran into Nevis inside, who was clearing the dungeon with the help of a single bodyguard. She had clearly stayed at her level solely to help the princess and had ranked up as soon as entering the dungeon. At first, Jill and the others planned on going their separate ways, but the offer of clearing the dungeon with the princess was too good to refuse. Having a member of a higher rank in their team would be a huge benefit, not to mention the princess's class was incredible. She had already reached the first advancement after receiving the mask, and Jill realized that she might outpace Mash at this rate. Though it wasn't necessarily the same, as Mash didn't have others to help him in the same way. The second reason the dungeon was easier was the incredibly dense mana in the air. It only took a few moments for them to recover their mana, and Jill was confident they could clear the dungeon within a week. Mash will be surprised when they have all reached the next rank and were adorned with new items. Even if what he had to do was gruesome, Jill had been a little jealous that he had advanced so quickly. His chaotic fate, as he put it, was a huge blessing for him. She wouldn't fall behind though, and was determined to keep up. Her family debts had been cleared away, and she thought that would make her lose her determination, but it did the opposite. The freedom that she gained from the removal of those debts had spurred her to want more. Maybe it was Mash rubbing off on her, but she wanted to be free from the class influence too. The world was finally open to her, and it made her crave more of it. She wanted to be able to see dragons and speak to supreme beings. It was a little petty and she knew it, but she was determined to stick to Mash if meant that she would have those opportunities. They had told Nevis about Mash's class advancement and she had been very interested in hearing about it. Now, she was determined to clear the dungeon before the tournament too, eager to see Mash's newfound power. Idly, Jill wondered if that would remain the same upon their return. No one had mentioned it before, but Mash looked a lot better now than when they first met. On top of his body becoming more muscular, his face had become more sculpted, and his eyes grew sharper. They were not drastic changes like Jill had experienced but were more minor like Red's. A few small changes compounded to make him significantly more attractive, and she was curious to see how the princess would react upon seeing him. It didn't seem like Red or Luke noticed the changes as much, and they didn't mention them either when talking earlier. Jill watched as the girl fought the monsters. She was wearing the odd mask and using some kind of purplish magic, at least that was the color of her mana. Jill didn't know exactly what it did, but it seemed to be a curse of some kind. The creatures would slow and decay, or grow ill, and vomit. It was quite gruesome, but it had made most of the large packs of monsters unable to fight. The monsters were covered in feathers but stood on two legs and their wings were as thick logs. Their bodies were thick and blocky, and she would think they were bears if not for the beak and large eyes. Strangely, she had seen a few of their heads turn almost entirely around, and she wondered what the purpose of that kind of magic was. It didn't matter much as the curse hit the group and disabled most of the monsters. Jill singled out a group that was relatively clumped and used her magic to kill them. She didn't gain a level even after killing the group but figured she could make it. The path they had taken was filled with monsters, and endless amounts seemed to be covering the open plains. The bodyguard for the princess had a lot of information on the dungeon, and she explained that it was an invasion-style dungeon. Their group would act as invaders and must push past the enemy army to kill the general and claim the city. Knowing that this was really another world, she guessed that this dungeon was an actual invasion organized by whoever owned their world. She hesitated slightly at first but realized that this was the only path for power and all dungeons were like this. However, the worst part was that she knew that those thoughts might be because of the class system but couldn't find a good reason against them. The potential freedom of the next advancement was what made her attack groups of monsters that were too far away. She wanted them to come towards them, to gain levels. Jill knew that she was not a hero, but she never wanted to be one. The sickening pleasure started rising in her like it did when she killed the bandit. The feeling had become a constant thing, happening whenever she killed anything, mindless monsters included. She was worried about becoming a psychopath but trusted her friends to keep her on the right path. Eventually, she could trust her own emotions, but for now, she would trust the others' judgment. The bodyguard had done it once before and provided a lot of information for what they needed to do. That bit of information shocked Jill since you could only complete the same dungeon once a year. Without Mash around, Jill guessed they wouldn't find any treasure troves. She had long accepted that it was a combination of his fate and magic that let them find treasure and would be happy to receive only the dungeon reward. Chapter 94, Waves. Mash was getting ready for the tournament, and to that end, he was deciding what clothes to bring. His mending clothes were still a ripped mess, and he didn't really know how to match any of the other clothes in his room. He had managed so far by just wearing training gear, but he wanted to do something flashier now. Deciding he wasn't the right person for the job, he had called the head butler over for his opinion. However, that only led him to send for a shop owner to make him a custom set of clothing. His sister had specified that if Mash ever asked for help with clothing to spare no expense on getting him what he needed. It sounded like she was deeply invested in making sure that he dressed nicely. He figured he should probably start putting in more effort in that department, especially considering all the attention he was receiving. Mash was currently waiting in a large space in the living room. He rose to his feet when he heard the cloth maker arrive and turned towards the main door as it opened. A butler was leading two people into the house. One was a lady who was dressed in a very well embroidered dress, and the other was a girl who looked even younger than Mash. He guessed that it was a master and her apprentice. Mash waved towards them as he walked up to them. "Greetings, young lord." The seamstress sounded surprised to see him and started giving him a deep bow. Before she could make the gesture, he waved his hands, speaking quickly. "No need for that." She stopped immediately, obviously familiar with this situation. Mash wanted to roll his eyes but managed to stop himself, though he did see the lady's apprentice do it. Orange eyes locked onto his when he glanced at the small girl. Mash hadn't realized how short the girl was from a distance. Now, he could tell that she wouldn't even reach his shoulders if she stood on her toes. "I am Leandra, and this is my assistant Samantha. I was informed that you needed clothes made urgently." She spoke without many pauses, her voice flat and clear. It seemed like she was the no-nonsense type, and he was glad to get right into real discussion. "Yeah, there is a tournament tonight, and I will probably need a lot of clothes for it. I would like it to have my family symbol where possible, other than that I will leave it at your discretion." Mash knew he was talking informally but didn't care. She nodded and pulled out a wide book. Without any additional questions, she started sketching on the paper. While she did that, she indicated for her assistant to get his measurements. That was a little awkward for Mash, but he managed to keep still while she took the measurements. She kept staring at his eyes, and he was glad that she didn't seem very scared. During the measurements, Mash added that they would need at least one set of clothes that can be put on and taken off quickly. Preferably one that could be put back together if it ripped. He didn't know if it was possible but had come up with an idea or two of how it could work. Though from the seamstress's nod it seemed like she had a method herself. Within a few moments she turned the book towards him, and he grabbed it eagerly. The page was filled with designs, each detailing an entire outfit. Looking through the designs, Mash noted a few unique ones. There were two that involved no shirt, instead relying on a loose-fitting overcoat. He could imagine that slipping that on and off would be easy and picked both of those designs, even if it did show a lot of his body. He was no longer marred with scars and scales and was able to pick designs that showed skin. All of the designs were good, though he didn't pick anything that altered the outline of his body. He didn't need or want to make his shoulders seem broader. It didn't take long to find what he wanted to wear for the first fight. It was the shirt that was covered in depictions of snakes, their family symbol pinned like a badge on his heart. The shirt seemed like it would be a little tight, but he guessed that she would know best. The pants were thick and lined with 3 or 4 pockets. He had never seen anything like them, but she assured him that it would look nice. Looking at the ensemble, he had to agree. As the seamstress started making it, she asked him if he wanted any enchantments. Mash just watched her work, and he realized that she had a cloth creation skill of some kind. He didn't know that there was a creation skill for something like that and observed her mana in curiosity. It was truly a complex blend of different types of mana, and he looked on with a little amazement. She explained that there was one enchantment she had already planned. The house symbol would be a center point, and pouring mana in it would allow him to reconnect all the pieces of the shirt. They would slither towards the symbol and reattach to it. It was much better than his plan. Honestly, he had imagined a shirt covered in separatable sections, that he could connect and disconnect with wooden hooks, but this would work better. Thinking about what enchantments he wanted, only 2 came to mind. He got a simple mending enchantment and another for heat resistance. The second part was more important to him, as he was certain he would burn his clothing with his lightning. In fact, he went so far as to get all his clothing with those 2 enchantments, that way he wouldn't need to worry about wearing them. The assistant's eyes bulged when he made the request, and he guessed it had to do with the expense. It did seem like that was the case. Despite only 8 pairs of clothes, the total cost was 600 gold. An exorbitant sum, but still less than what he had in his reserves. Plus, he hadn't been spending much while he lived with his brother. He easily gave them the money and even a little extra to incentivize getting all the clothing done quickly. Apparently, it would take a while for all the enchantments, as the seamstress didn't have the mana to make so many so quickly. He still gave them the extra gold, not minding the cost. That was the only thing he needed to get done before the tournament, and waited patiently for the time of the fight. His excitement had made the day drag on, but the time did pass. He talked idly with his siblings, and as the hour drew close, he guessed that his friends weren't going to make it. He had been waiting for them but decided it was time to go. Both of his siblings walked with him, and their families set out for the guild. The tournament was a public event but had a high cost, and he knew that it was going to be well guarded. It took place beneath the guild in an arena designed for this express purpose. When they arrived at the guild, Mash was both surprised and pleased to see his friends were there. They looked tired, like they had been fighting non-stop for the past few months. He raised his eyebrows at them when he got in range of his draconic domain. None of them had advanced their class, and he was surprised to notice that Nevis was with them. That only caused his eyebrows to rise higher. He felt compelled to ask them but had waited for them to arrive at the mansion and needed to see when his fight would be. They seemed to know and rushed him inside. "You have the first fight. What were you doing?" Jill spoke hurriedly, but he heard the faint smugness in her voice. Still, Mash answered her question. "I was waiting for you, and how close did you guys get?" We'll tell you if you win." A smirk plastered Jill's face, and Mash only rolled his eyes as he met with Jack. The Vice-Guild Master had been standing near the door, obviously waiting for his arrival. "Really thought you were dodging your fight after hearing about your opponent?" Jack chuckled as he spoke, but Mash had not yet seen who his opponent was. Seeming to read his expression, Jack let out a deep laugh as he explained. "You're fighting against the 4th prince." Mash heard Nevis gasp as she heard the words, and he turned towards her with some confusion. She was obviously startled and seemed a little anxious about the situation. Only after they had gotten out of earshot of the rest of the people, did Mash ask Nevis about the situation. "What's the problem?" "He's a sound mage." She hissed the words as she spoke. Mash thought she was angry about something, but he didn't have to ask her much else as he was rushed down a different path from the audience. He could hear the others vaguely as he separated. They were clearly bothered by the revelation of who Mash would be fighting, but he could only feel his excitement rising. He started outpacing Jack as his anticipation urged him forward. Most people probably would have paled at the prospect of fighting a sound mage. It was common knowledge that sound magic was one of the most powerful variants. They were capable of almost instantaneous attacks, and each was practically indefensible. Still, that was also true of lightning. Both magics were considered some of the best in terms of offensive power, falling just beneath space in terms of power. None of this mattered to Mash, as he approached the arena. The hallway had been crowded since there was a line at the entrance. Jack led Mash right past the line, rushing him down the hallway. It was all stone and lit through the engraving style that most basements were. Jack had been giving him instruction and a rundown of the rules and protocols, but he only vaguely heard him. The rules were simple enough: incapacitate your opponent without killing them. Though anything short of an actual death could be healed. Only nodding, Mash realized he was already standing atop a moving platform. It seemed like this arena was designed to be similar to the Colosseum. Slowly the platform began to rise, and Mash realized he must have kept the prince waiting. Well, he guessed that he wouldn't be able to become friends with the prince after blasting him with lightning anyways. He heard the referee start to give them introductions, and he was surprised to hear his introduction. Brother to a sentinel and saint, the little monster, Mash. One of the saviors from the recent events. His power had dwarfed his rank before. Will he accomplish the same in this rank? And his opponent? One of the princes of the kingdom, and a rare sound mage. Having stopped an uprising with little effort, the suppressor. Will he live up to his name and quiet the roars of the little monster? Mash didn't like being called little monster so much. The whole introduction had bothered him. He did not want to be called a savior because of what had happened. That was not something he agreed with, and it caused him to grow angrier. Thankfully, there was a willing victim to take the brunt of his frustration. As he broke into the arena, he got a good look at the prince. He wore an immaculate suit and had clearly done his best to be styled for the fight. Mash had done something similar with the new clothing he was wearing. That was one piece of joy for Mash. He really liked his appearance, and the shirt had turned out even better than he had expected. It was made of cloth but had been designed to stretch significantly and fit his body perfectly. The referee was going over the rules, mostly just for the audience. Mash raised his palm toward the prince, obviously in preparation of an attack. The man didn't even react, black eyes meeting Mash's own. He looked confident, sure that Mash couldn't do anything. Instantly, Mash realized that the prince didn't know of his lightning and thought that he could defeat Mash before his wooden creations could do anything. Mash didn't hesitate to take advantage of the opportunity and had Priscilla make an extremely powerful outline. Mash wouldn't hold back in the slightest. That was a guaranteed way to lose. Begin. The word left the referee's mouth, and Mash reacted instantly. The prince looked like he was going to say something but never got the chance. Lightning launched from his hands, a bolt as strong as he could manage. It split into a branching tree of light. He was especially pleased to see several of the branches strike the prince, though many just hit the surroundings. Mash hadn't held anything back, and the resounding thunder shook the room. It all happened in an instant, far too quickly for anyone to respond. Mash only grinned as he saw a somewhat burned prince fall to the ground unmoving. A sense of euphoria filled him as silence filled the room, and only then did he realize that the prince was completely still. Unconsciously, an image flashed into Mash's mind, of another boy who he had killed. That might have been a mistake. Chapter 95, Tournament continues. The crowd was stunned by the course of events. Nobody moved as small streaks of smoke rose from the prince. Mash was confused as well, a question flashing through his mind. Did the man have nothing for defense? That didn't last long as several people moved all at once. In an instant Mash saw several people land beside the prince. Several healers instantly started to heal the fallen prince, though his attention was elsewhere. 5 knights and guard of some kind had drawn their blades toward Mash, the closest of which seemed eager to strike. All of them were entirely covered in armor, but Mash could see the blade shake with anticipation. They didn't move since Mash didn't stay idle when they arrived. Wood had already formed an armor around him, growing over his clothing rather than through it. Mash was certain the knights would be around or over level 100, but with his dragon form, he figured he could keep up. A moment later Mash felt a chill spread through the room, his brother appearing beside him, blade already drawn. Jill was behind him, and she gave Mash a concerned look. Frost had begun creeping around the entire room. The knights had thicker layers of ice growing on them too, though they didn't react to it. The knight, who was eager with anticipation, stepped forward a little. "What do you think you're doing? Your brother." The knight's voice indicated that it was a man, and its self-righteousness made Mash want to laugh. This scene was so similar to before, but as the knight's words got cut off, Mash realized that there was a difference. "Did nothing wrong, the prince will be fine. And I am trying to stop 5 rash people from running to their deaths." His brother's response filled Mash with confidence, and he looked at the knights without the slightest bit of hesitation. Honestly, even if they were a rank above him, Mash figured that his dragon form would give him enough power to kill them. His brother had wanted him to demonstrate his dragon form, and Mash had excitedly shown him his new power. His brother wasn't one to lie either, so he figured that he would have been able to beat the knights in truth. It seemed like there were a lot of advantages to eating dragon flesh, and he grinned at the thought. The grin was poorly timed, and the knights clearly grew more agitated. However, another person arrived, and their presence drastically changed the situation. Nevis had leaped into the arena, floating down with some magical power. Even before touching the ground, she yelled towards the knights. "Stand down. This was a fair duel, nothing more." Her words echoed slightly, but some of the knights lowered their blades. The 2 most zealous still gripped their blade firmly. However, they flinched when another voice joined the fray. "What do you think you're doing? Embarrassing me and the crown out of misguided fervor. You have acted beyond yourselves." It was the prince, who had risen to his feet and stormed towards them. His voice boomed, shaking the room with each word, the heat of his anger seeming to combat the chill from his brother. He was furious, but it was not directed at Mash. The knights who had drawn their blades lowered them now and somehow seemed sheepish despite wearing a full set of plate armor. The shrinking forms of the knights squirmed under the gaze of the prince. "Well, that was certainly more exciting than I was expecting for my first fight. Lightning Hui, didn't have any information on that in my notes. Something with the rank up." The prince sounded surprisingly amiable, even though Mash had fried him a few seconds ago. Mash felt a great deal of relief when the prince revealed himself to not be hostile, though Mash figured there were several reasons for that. 2 obvious ones stood on the grounds currently. His brother was already over level 100 and clearly still on the rise. Not to mention Mash's incredible pace and power, as his brother seemed fully confident in his ability to deal with 5 knights, 2 of which were over level 100. Mash could see why the prince would want to stay on their good side, but decided to take his attitude at face value for now. There was no reason to believe otherwise, and Mash was growing tired of reacting with suspicion and anger. It wasn't all gone, but he would make the effort. The commotion had been delaying the tournament, and he was glad to leave the arena. He didn't have to walk, as some of the teleporters who came with the prince took them all into a private room. Honestly, he had expected that the discussion wasn't over, but was relieved to see that this was where his friends were. It was a room placed within the wall, and it sat over the stands. A glass wall let him see the arena easily, and he was unsurprised to see the referee trying to start the next fight. Mash moved his eyes back to the prince and noticed for the first time that his clothing was undamaged. That was impressive, and he wished he knew what enchantments it had. Clothing that wouldn't be destroyed by his lightning would be incredibly useful. Though seeing it did make Mash want to ask another question. "Did you not have any protective items?" Mash felt the knights grow tense, and only when Red coughed and added "my lord" did Mash remember about propriety. With all that had happened, he completely forgot about speaking properly. He didn't correct himself, or rather, he didn't get the opportunity to. "It's fine. I do have a few protective items, but hadn't bothered activating any of them. Honestly, I expected to beat you long before any of your attacks even reached me. It seems like I underestimated you. Though, I feel disheartened to hear that my sister did not inform me of your developments. It seems like she. The prince didn't get to finish as Nevis jabbed him with an elbow. She glared at him before responding. "I didn't know about the lightning either. And I wouldn't tell you if I did." She said the words coldly, never dropping her glare. The knights seemed to grow relaxed finally and moved to obviously pre-designated positions in the room. The rest of the group continued to talk for a bit, the prince having excused an informal speech. That was good, since Mash had never really learned how to talk given his position. They started watching the rest of the fights, fully aware that Mash had another fight today. He didn't know who his opponent was going to be and watched the rest of the fighters. Mash felt confident that he could beat most of them, but there were a few that stood out to him. One was the hero from the arena, and Mash guessed that he would be fighting them. There was little doubt in his mind that it would come to pass. The other significant fighter was a melee fighter of some kind. He had been fighting a stone mage and had ignored every single attack that was thrown at him. Mash wondered if his wooden creations would even be able to damage the man, but honestly was more curious to try and fight him with his dragon form. Mash kind of hoped that his next fight would be against the man. He wasn't so lucky, and Mash found himself heading towards the arena again. He was fighting against another annoying mage, though not one as dangerous as Sound. It was still a troublesome one though. It was a combination of summoning and illusion magic. Mash figured he could overpower the man easily but decided to try and use the Priscilla form for the fight. He guessed that the improved senses would help him deal with the illusions. As he rose onto the arena, Mash didn't bother paying any attention to announcements. The referee called for the start of the fight, and scales grew over Mash's skin. The referee called him a true monster, but Mash only rolled his eyes as he tried to sort through the now 100 duplicates of the man. Not to mention the countless hordes of monsters. Mash realized a few things immediately. He couldn't sort through the illusions with his eyes, but as one entered the range of draconic domain it collapsed from the pressure. It seemed like the illusions themselves wouldn't be able to withstand the passive strength of his aura while he was in this state. Running through the illusions would be annoying, and he realized that he didn't really need to do that. He could just clutter the battlefield with his imitations of Priscilla. Time to show off his ability for mass destruction, it seemed, and imitations of Priscilla started growing from him, and once they grew to be as tall as he was, he separated it and sent it to thrash about the battlefield. The real Priscilla was trying to determine where the real man was while taking control of the copies that he made. That was something he had figured out yesterday and was more than happy to let her micromanage the copies. It would be too mentally taxing for him otherwise. A few real summoned monsters entered his domain and Mash reacted quickly. His speed of growing wood had improved drastically, and he shot a wooden spear through the creature. It sprouted from his hand and grew forward like a charging animal, easily puncturing the creature. Another creature tried jumping on him from behind. It was meant to hit a blind spot, but another simply held his other hand towards it. It grew into a monstrous mouth, biting half the creature in two. Neither of the creatures was particularly powerful, but the number of illusions and summons surprised Mash. The man's mana seemed endless, or maybe illusions were just extremely efficient. The man was just imitating having unlimited mana though, while Mash really did. There was a quickly growing army of wooden clones to combat the illusions in a battle that resembled a war. Several fireballs launched at Mash and at some of the clones. Shaking his head slightly, Mash easily dodged out of the way of the firebolt. The clones that lit on fire only became more dangerous due to the flames. Why did everyone assume that fire would beat wood? The man wasn't completely helpless though, as another of the summoned creatures fired a bolt of lightning when Mash landed from his earlier dodge. It hit him, but it was so weak that his improved resistance in the Priscilla form let him nullify it. There was a little pain, but it felt like a glorified bee sting. He wasn't done though, and Priscilla initiated the second part of his plan. Lightning surged from each of the clones on the battlefield, bathing it in a burst of light. The attack wasn't particularly powerful, but it would be good enough. It was true enough, and he saw the real man get stunned by the blow. It was enough, and he leaped toward the man, finding himself moving faster than he expected. A wooden staff grew in his hand, becoming thicker like a club as he grew close. Though the man yelled before the blow could land. "I surrender. You goddamn monster, just how much mana do you have?" The illusions winked out of existence as he called for the fight to end. The referee reacted quickly and appeared in the middle of the arena, clearly positioning himself between the two of them. Was he worried that Mash would continue to attack? Rolling his eyes, Mash dropped the weapon and returned to his human form. The scales fade back into the skin. The many copies of Priscilla stopped moving, but they didn't dissolve. Instead, all his wood remained on the battlefield, and Mash felt a little bad as he headed off the arena. Jill appeared and grabbed Mash, taking him back to the room quickly. Nevis was the first to talk when he arrived. Her eyes glowed with excitement and curiosity, as she looked at him. "Since when could you make clones of Priscilla, and why did you leave them down there?" Mash was confused at first, but looking at the arena told him what she meant. The people sent to clean the arena were extremely careful around the clones, and Mash realized that they all thought the creations were real. His replicas were entirely covered in scales and had moved about like living beings, so of course, they thought it was a summoning of some kind. That also explained why the summoner had seemed so angry. As the pieces started falling into place, he rubbed his forehead while trying to figure out what to do. Chapter 96, Endless Fighting. He stared down at his creations and had them all approach one end of the arena, after which, Mash had Jill teleport the two of them down there. Mash went around breaking as many as he could out of the sight of the audience and had Jill help in destroying his creations. It was annoying, but they got it done relatively quickly. After Mash's second fight, he knew that he was done for the day. Even if it was unnecessary, Mash stuck around for the remaining fights. Any one of the winners could end up being his opponent, not to mention he wanted to see more of the hero's abilities. However, he didn't end up getting that, as the man's fight ended just as quickly as the previous one. The weapon seemed near invincible, as orbs of fire blocked any spells, and a single attack was enough to devastate the entire arena. Not to mention the person continued to wear a full set of armor that covered their entire body. If possible, Mash would hide his dragon form until that fight, but he knew that wasn't likely. There was still the melee fighter that he wanted to test his power against, so his plan would only work if he fought the hero first. The fighters were given a day of break before their next fights, so Mash didn't have any fights scheduled for tomorrow. It was day of relaxation, though he didn't know what to do during it. For now, he wanted to hear about what his friends had gone through. The walk home was a bit different from the walk to the guild. A lot more people accosted them for recruitment. Mash was a bit surprised and confused by the nicely dressed men and women that approached him and his friends to join them. They were apparently competitors to the Adventurers Guild, or at least trying to compete with them. They were funded by nobles and tried to offer incredibly large sums of money to get their group to join them, but Mash just ignored them. Some of the people had hounded them all the way back home, but they didn't approach as his presence scared them. They tried once, but Mash saw them grow tense when they entered his draconic domain. Mash had realized what the trigger was for the skill, treating the recruiters as enemies. With that activation, he created a space around him, and the rest of the journey was uninterrupted. Once they returned, Mash was going to ask them about the dungeon, but was interrupted by the head butler handing him a letter. Mash considered ignoring it for later, but the butler told him that it was from the Colosseum. Deciding that it was important, he opened the letter and quickly skimmed through it. "Congratulations on the rank up. We were surprised to hear that you had already reached the next rank. Truly you are someone most gifted and driven. Your path is boundless, and I'm certain your journey will be a long one. Of course, I only wish to provide you with more opportunities like the ants and have prepared an even grander fight for you. As I mentioned before, you will be fighting a creature a rank above yours, and I am certain it will be enough to give you a few levels. Your fight is scheduled for the morning of the 21st day of the 16th month. I realize this may be abrupt, but I have no doubts that you are eager to test your new capabilities. Especially considering your grand display at the tournament today. Well, I look forward to seeing your best effort." Mash read through the short letter and sighed. The Colosseum organizers had scheduled his fight for tomorrow and had the gall to treat it like they had given him days to prepare. Though, Mash wasn't too worried, confident that he could use his draconic transformation to beat most monsters the Colosseum had. Honestly, he could probably manage it with the imitation skill alone and wouldn't even need to use the transformation. Despite being saddled with another fight, he was excited about it. The Colosseum organizers would probably find a powerful monster for the fight, and he was eager to get some new transformations. Mash did have other transformations and had tried a few of those, but none of them were particularly powerful. The best other transformation he had was one of the lizards from the labyrinth dungeon. It was the one that could become invisible and cling to walls. He had been given those abilities when in that form, and he learned that it was a function of their scales that let them do both, and as it so happened, his transformation of those gave him its scales. He tried a few other things too, like the ants from his second Colosseum trial, but that was a worthless transformation. His skin had hardened, and he got a bit stronger, but it was so much weaker than his other transformations. All of that only made him eager to find new monsters, and he wished he could go back to the Beastman City. Not for the city itself, but because that was the only way to meet the World Carrier again. Mash was certain he could get a small piece of the creature's scales and wished desperately to consume it. He didn't know if it was the class that was giving him the desire to eat other creatures, but he didn't fight with it for that one. Even just a drop of the creature's power would make him unstoppable. Sadly, the contract was still in place, and he wouldn't be able to go back for another 4 or 5 months. He had already decided that he was going to leave the capital before the contract ran out, but that didn't mean he was planning on breaking it. There was still the one other local dungeon that he would visit, but there were dozens of other dungeons he wanted to go to. Even if he didn't get a piece of a scale from the world carrier, he was certain he could find some other powerful creatures to consume. He decided he could push off hearing his friend's story, far more eager to get some sleep. He didn't really need to sleep for that long, but it would make time go by more quickly. He handed the letter to Red, before telling them he was going to go to bed and would hear about the dungeon after the fight tomorrow. In the time it took them to read the letter, he was already out of sight. Even if he wanted to head to bed immediately, he was distinctly aware that he should have a bath and clean the clothes. The seamstress would get him all the clothes by the end of the week, but for now, this was all that he had. After finishing a quick bath, he found the head butler and asked him to have the clothes cleaned for tomorrow. However, the butler told him that it was unnecessary. The seamstress had dropped off another pair while he was at the tournament. She had been quite adamant in making sure he didn't wear the same clothes for multiple days. Well, that was a good sign, and he nodded towards the butler. The man still took the clothing to have it cleaned. The morning came quickly as he expected, and Mash spent little time in the morning eating a meal. He didn't eat a lot because if the fight was truly dangerous, he didn't want to risk vomiting. Afterward, he meditated while he waited for the time of the fight. His friends had come down the stairs and Mash stood up when Luke entered his range. Instantly his eyes flicked towards Luke, scanning him for differences. His appearance didn't change much, though his hair was now a clear white and his eyes were similarly so. They stood out considering the darker tan skin that he had. It didn't make him look old, instead of giving him the visage of eternal youth. Mash had been too self-centered last night, and it seemed like he missed out on Luke's class advancement. Mash didn't hide his petulance as he spoke like a child would. "You should have woken me." Luke only rolled his eyes, before sitting down and responding. "You needed the rest. I hear you've been training without much rest before the tournament. Plus, you have another fight today." His concern stopped any callous remarks from Mash, and he only nodded. It was true, Mash had trained non-stop the day before the tournament. Even with pushing his skills in all kinds of directions, he didn't manage to improve any of his stats. He guessed that he had passed the point where a day's worth of training would change anything. They talked a little more as the others arrived, but Mash left before Jill and Red had been ready. They would be able to get to the arena before his fight, and he wanted to make sure that he wasn't late. As he approached the Colosseum, he realized this was the first time he was fighting this early in the day. His fight always seemed to be later in the day, so this was a pleasant surprise. There was that freshness of a not yet started day as he walked through the streets. The air was unpolluted by the smells of restaurants and vendors, and the air was filled with a faint fog. It was a wonderful feeling as he headed towards the Colosseum. When he got near the building, he realized that there was another reason for the emptiness thus far. The building was surrounded by a small crowd of people, and Mash realized that his fight was early so that the audience would be large even in the morning. Thankfully no one noticed him sneak over to the fighter's entrance. It was the same attendant that he had seen the last 2 times here. She beamed when he appeared. "Welcome, you made it right on time. Follow me and we can get started as soon as the Colosseum fills up." Somewhat expecting the response, Mash had already known what to do. He followed the attendant as she led him towards the arena. There was not much different now than his other trips, except for the glances the attendant kept shooting at him. Eventually, he just asked her about it. "Why do you keep looking at me?" "I'm sorry, it's just that, I'm surprised at the sudden change in appearance. I mean, just a few days ago you wore a creepy mask, and now you look like an average kid." Mash didn't know how to respond to that. After all, he had done a lot of things to hide his appearance before. He should probably care more about his appearance, but after his class advancement, he just didn't want to bother with it. The mask could still be used though, as he could incorporate it into his armor easily. Maybe he would investigate putting some enchantments on it. Well, that was a concern for later. "Not that you look bad or anything, I was just expecting something more exciting, considering how you looked before." The attendant must have assumed that she had offended him, but he just waved his hand in a placating gesture. He didn't really care and had been the one to ask her about it anyways. Instead, he refocused on the fight at hand and started taking his arms out of the sleeves of his jacket. This was one of the designs where he only had a jacket and a pair of pants from the seamstress. Beneath the jacket he had a simple grey shirt, that was meant to leave attention on the jacket. The jacket was a flashy mix of reds and yellows with his house symbol on the back. As he stepped onto the rising platform, he had removed his hands from the sleeves of the jacket. Letting the jacket rest against his back, he was careful to make sure it didn't fall as he rose to the arena. Only once he fully reached the ground did he move his arms so that the coat fell onto the ground. He scanned the gates as his coat fell onto the ground but didn't see any monsters. That only lasted a second thought as a creature descended from a cage in the sky. It crashed into the ground in front of him, causing the whole arena to quake from the force. Looking up towards the head of the monster, Mash's eyes trailed the muscled legs of the beast that were adorned with a light golden fur. Finally, he met with a large but human face on an otherwise monstrous body, and couldn't help but open his mouth. What in the world? Chapter 97, Dragon's Hunt. The face of the creature was easily triple his height, and it seemed impossibly perfect. It was a beautiful woman with tan brownish skin, the unnatural beauty reminding Mash of the auctioneer lady. The difference was in the body. It clearly belonged to a large feline creature of some kind. Though the large wings were something else. Each was bigger than a house, and the creature could only barely fly in the arena. Mash guessed that was the point. The arena acted as a container for the great beast, and Mash gaped trying to remember anything about it. Nothing came, it was something he had never seen before. The referee started the fight, but he was too preoccupied to focus on anything else. Well, it looked like this fight was going to be blind, but Mash had one bigger concern. In the past, he probably would have just killed the thing without a second thought, but he saw an intelligence in the gaze of the being. When he killed the warden and the transformed people, he realized how much of his emotion he had recovered. It might have been the fusion with Priscilla, the prolonged use of the earrings, or any number of things that had changed since he last killed someone he considered intelligent or human. After his recent advancement, it felt like the lock that had been placed on that had been freed, and Mash was racked with emotion over the people he had recently killed. It tired him more than he wanted to admit. However, he knew what a creature like this really was. A lost wanderer, most likely, someone who had entered this world from another. Now, they were being forced to fight. It was one thing to kill the mindless monsters like the ants, but something like this felt wrong. Thinking about Mash didn't necessarily need to kill the creature, though he might get in trouble for what he was thinking of. Hello. The word came out hesitatingly as Mash was still unsure whether the creature could respond or not. Mash didn't get a response he understood, a hiss leaving the creature's mouth. Was that a type of communication? Taking it in the best way possible, Mash tried to gesture for communication. It mostly involved waving his hand in the air and gesturing in differing ways. He spoke while doing them. I can't understand you. It still hadn't attacked Mash, so he thought it was going well, but this situation was clearly confusing everyone else. The audience had long since gone silent, the referee matching their confusion. Finally, he heard something, or rather knew something. It was a similar gesture to the way Priscilla sent messages and told Mash the creature had some form of mind magic. Why do you not fight? All other humans fight. Mash let his arms fall to his sides as the message entered his mind. The response was both expected and somewhat disappointing. The creature's perception of humanity was true for her, but only because of the class system. Not all humans are the same. Do you want to fight? What about returning home or going free? A low hiss left the creature's mouth, and the next message sounded much more sinister. Return home? No, I am too close to my next evolution, to my revenge. First, I will strike back, eat my fill, and then leave. If you choose to help me, we can start now, and I will spare some of your brethren. Well, that was more violent than he expected, but he understood why she would be angry. Captivity for any length of time would make someone angry. He had much the same reaction when he was younger. That did make Mash consider something else though. Mash realized he didn't know if the creature was an adult or a child of their species. Deciding it would be best to try and find another solution, he tried something else. I'm not the strongest person here, nowhere near it. Honestly, I'm not even sure if I can help you escape from here. Trying to. Mash cut off his words as a sudden headache racked his mind. Priscilla's message lodged itself within his mind. Fight her, she is trying to take control of you. That explained the headache, and Mash reacted quickly. He transformed into his Priscilla form, knowing that it would boost his mental capabilities. As the scales wrapped over his skin, the headache vanished, and Mash decided he would need to fight back. The creature had tried to take control of his mind, and that was not something Mash could ignore. A peaceful resolution was not going to be found here. That only grew more obvious as the creature's large paw slammed into the side of his body. He let the force carry him away from the creature, forming his dragon replica around him. The wood grew faster than normal, mainly due to its transformed state. It felt like he was combining his monsters when he did this, and Mash couldn't help but take advantage of the magic control. As the wood grew around him, he let it grow beyond what he had in training. The feline creature was large, but within a minute he matched the beast's size. He didn't stop there though, growing larger still as he lashed out trying to bite into the creature. An enormous wooden maw bit into the fur around the creature's shoulder. Blood poured into his mouth, and a distinctly human shriek could be heard throughout the arena. The monster was thoroughly angry now, and a large force of wind crashed into Mash's side. Even with the diminished pain, it felt like 100 nails had pierced his side. Each cut on his side was like another nail. Mash quickly realized that it was a constant stream, the wind was trying to dig towards his real body. Consciously Mash formed wood over the cut sections of his body and layered it constantly to defend himself. Deciding he need to try and slow the creature down, Mash ripped a chunk of the creature's shoulder off and pushed away from it. He swallowed it quickly, gaining far more strength than he expected. Without slowing down, he lunged forward again, slamming his overly long clawed hand down on the creature. They clung to the creature, cutting deep into its body. It only grew worse as he grew more wooden claws, each cutting deeper into its body. The creature bit him in his neck, though her teeth couldn't get through all the wood. The beats of wings could be heard, and the creature leaped upwards. Even with his size and strength, Mash was carried with it into the sky. Mash worried for a second that they were going to do some serious damage to the city. He didn't think that a simple ceiling would be able to stop the beast. At their size, they would be able to destroy streets and buildings without notice. It didn't come to pass as they both collided with a barrier of some kind and rebounded towards the ground. Neither of them had gotten very far off the ground considering their size, but the impact still shook the building. He guessed it would have done far more damage if the barrier wasn't there. The impact separated the two of them. Large spikes of wood lodged into the creature's back where Mash's claws ripped off. It was not a pleasant experience for Mash, even if he consciously knew that no real damage had been done. It was as if his nails had been torn off, and even subdued, the pain stung. Ignoring it, he tried to bite the creature again, letting more wooden blades sprout from his wings as he tried to close them around the creature. His wings got deflected by the creature's own, but his bite had landed. A hiss was followed by a powerful force of the wind, and one of his wings tore off his back as they tried to catch the wind. Mash could feel his neck stretch from the exertion, but he managed to hold by reinforcing the wood there. Something else happened when he did that though, and Mash took full advantage of Hunt activating. Faster than he had managed before, he slammed his claws into the creature, locking it in place. Before the skill activated, his physical strength was relatively comparable to the monster, but now he dwarfed it. Mash heard bones crunch as his clawed hands held the creature in place. It continued to batter him with wind, and the improved stats helped him resist the storm. The noise though struck him. It was loud and felt like he was really at the heart of a storm. Mash didn't hold back though, and spikes grew from his body, piercing the creature's body. Not wanting to keep the creature like this, Mash strove to end the fight quickly. He ripped out another chunk from the monster as he pulled his head back. Mash swallowed quickly and commanded Priscilla to form lightning. She had been reading his thoughts and acted quickly. The humanoid face of the monster was contorted in rage, and Mash knew that it had grown too vindictive to surrender. Mash opened his mouth again while continuing to grow his entire body larger. When he was using the imitation skill, he had to grow the whole imitation rather than a specific part. He didn't stop growing even after the lightning left his mouth in an attack that resembled what Priscilla had used before. The lightning struck the creature and strands of lightning lashed over its body and his own hands. His hands stung from the attack, though it was much worse for the monster. The lightning had struck its humanoid face and burned into it. However, as life left the creature, Mash felt the rush of a level up before collapsing onto the ground. Mash was pleasantly surprised to see that he didn't lose his consciousness. Perhaps it was the change in the skill, or maybe one of his other skills. Either way, he was able to stay fully conscious as he laid unmoving on the charred remains of the monster. His dragon imitation didn't dissipate, and he still felt connected to it too. Immediately he started his recovery, hoping that he could at least dismiss the transformation before the announcer finished yelling. "Can you believe what you just saw? Is he just a bronze rank with that kind of power? Well, I certainly can't believe it, and I saw the fight. I mean, he literally transformed into a dragon, and the lightning. I think even the castle shook from that attack. What about the size of his creation and the amount of wood he formed? What kind of class does he even have? Does he not have any mana costs? Truly, a monster. Though definitely not a little one." The announcer sounded excited and the shouts from the audience told Mash they thought the same. The announcer continued though and prattled on and on about the fight. Was he stalling for Mash to leave on his own? How did he know? Shaking his head, Mash realized that he regained enough energy to dismiss his transformation. As the wood around him decayed, Mash quickly pulled out a change of clothes. He knew his clothes would rip and had prepared for it. Mash managed to put on an extra pair of pants by the time the wood decayed around him. His jacket was on the floor somewhere and Mash wanted to go get it. He remembered where it had landed, and it probably hadn't moved much. The real problem was getting down. He didn't have enough energy to form a wooden creation and he was on top of the creature. With his improved stats, he figured the fall wouldn't be able to do real damage to him and leaped off. Impacting the ground caused his legs to wobble, and he fell to one knee. Nothing was seriously damaged though and he pushed himself back to his feet. The imitation hadn't fully decayed yet, and Mash could still see the wood crumbling around him. It only took a few moments to find his jacket. It was missing a sleeve. Mash guessed that it had gotten caught on something and then tore off from the sudden movement. Mash still put it on, even if there was only one sleeve. After that, he trudged back towards the moving platform. There was still cheering and shouting, and before descending, Mash really looked towards the crowd for the first time. Chapter 98, An Unexpected Outcome. The eyes that gazed back from him were not quite what he expected. The mass of looks that met him from the crowd was a mixture of fear and awe. Mash had looked at other people like that once, so he knew what they were thinking. Most of the general audience would not be very powerful and seeing someone easily demonstrate enough power to destroy the city would have shaken them. Mash's fight had been between two enormous creatures whose bodies could have destroyed homes in an instant. On top of that, Mash had devoured large chunks of the monster. Mash descended from the arena, contemplating the fight itself. He had fought against a powerful creature, but that wasn't the problem. It was an intelligent being in the same vein as Priscilla. Mash didn't know how he felt about killing it. Certainly, it was something that he was supposed to do, but was it the right thing to do? The monster was clearly malicious, and Mash had quickly dismissed a friendly ending when it tried to take control of his mind. He enjoyed the fight despite all that and had been absorbed in the thrill of battle. Mash left the arena and met up with the others. They had seen the fight and had come out to meet him before heading back home. With barely any energy remaining, Mash felt drained. He could have just meditated some more but wanted to go to sleep. A good rest sounded more valuable than just recovering his energy. He also wanted to test transforming into the Sphinx form and listening to their story about the dungeon, but that could wait until after he woke up. On the way back, his friends asked him about the fight and what happened at the start of it. To them, it looked like he was talking and doing nonsense with the monster, then randomly entering a savage battle to the death. Those looks that he saw made more sense now. He proceeded to explain to his friends about the short conversation he had had with the creature and the mental attacks it tried to use. Talking about what happened during the fight lasted until they returned home. Once they got back, Mash went back to sleep. He figured he could wake up before lunch and would hear about the dungeon then. When he woke up, it was later in the afternoon than he intended. The others had finished eating already and were in the training room. Mash grabbed some food before heading to the others. The chef had made a special dish to celebrate winning the tournament. It was flatbread covered in cheese and meats. It was excellent, and Mash grabbed 2 full dishes before finding Luke. As expected, he was trying out his new abilities, and Mash didn't hesitate to call him over. Mash asked for the story now, and Luke's face contorted between joy and sadness as if he had wanted to avoid the conversation. Finally, he settled on resolve and started speaking. Luke P.O.V 2 days ago. The dungeon was taking longer than they expected it would. It was already the 8th day, which meant that it was the morning of Mash's fight. Once the princess's bodyguard advanced her class, they figured it would be easy and they could race through the dungeon. That ended up being false, as the generals and lord of the town were stronger than she was. Even with his buffs, they only barely managed to beat one of the generals, and from what they knew, there were still 2 left. And that was not including the lord of the city, who was even stronger than the generals. Originally, they tried to wait for an opportunity to attack a general alone, but ever since one died, they grouped up and remained within the throne room. It looked like the final fight would be between the generals and the lord. He was worried for a few reasons but eager for another. Honestly, he wasn't sure if they could handle the fight, but he was close to advancing his class and the fight would certainly give him the 2 levels he needed. Luke hadn't stolen any more souls and felt sick whenever he remembered what he did. He hadn't used the skill he gained either, and looking at it caused his hair to rise. Name, Lucas. Class, Soul Strengthened War Cleric. Level, 59. Health, 1210/1210. Stamina, 790/790. Mana, 1130/1130. Fortitude, 121. Endurance, 79. Strength, 98. Agility, 89. Intelligence, 113. Wisdom, 174. Charisma, 89. Free stats, 0. Skills, Soul Absorption, Soul Mutation, Soul Enhancement, Return to State, Soul Brands, Corrupt Distortion, Strengthened Soul, 1 in Mind and Body, Untouchable Spirit. Corrupt Distortion, stolen from a being of pure evil, you take its ability to crush and twist the soul, and as to be expected, the body will always follow the soul. Only affects creatures with a soul. Luke stared at the skill and shivered. His stats had increased massively as well. Apparently, stealing the soul of the creature had given him a massive increase in his mental stats. Each had gone up by almost 20 points, and he understood why liches were such a big problem. Not to mention his charisma had been consistently increasing as of late. The fame from his display in the arena was continuing to spread. If a being spent its life stealing souls, it would eventually have enough stats to be near unkillable. Luke sighed, thinking about how he had essentially made himself their biggest enemy. Well, that was fine, and he would be happy if he could defeat such an evil being. This dungeon was different though, and he struggled at first with what to do. Ever since Mash had told him what dungeons really were, Luke had started to hesitate more about what to do. Killing these monsters was essentially massacring an army and storming a city. At first, he tried communicating with a few, but after a little while realized that there was no hope at reconciliation. However, it was only once he entered the city that he truly lost his empathy for these beings. Luke had seen several signs of humans within the camps, and they had even rescued one or two. The humans were being used as slaves and food, and their treatment was far worse than simply being killed. It was that sight that made Luke want to end this battle. Luke looked over the group, which now contained 11 people. Originally, it was just the 5 of them, but they had met another team that was trying to get through the final room. They wanted the rewards for the dungeon but weren't strong enough to clear it. The group had been waiting for another team to arrive and hoped that they could clear the dungeon together. The princess accepted their aid, though Luke, Red, and Jill were much more skeptical. The princess seemed to believe the people wouldn't dare to do anything malicious, but after the incidents in Crawl, Luke wasn't as trusting anymore. Mash was the most trusting of the group, and Luke had asked him about how he could be so trusting after everything he had been through. Mash had explained that he would rather keep trusting people than be vindictive towards everyone he met. It wasn't that he expected the best of people, rather that he didn't want to become such a cynical person. Mash had strangely said that distrusting everyone was exhausting, but Luke felt the same way about the opposite. Trusting people was a burden, though it was one he wanted to carry. However, that did mean that people needed to earn his trust first. He would not get into another situation like with Leah. So, Luke kept the other group at a distance and tried not to get close with them. Jill had been the liaison and had acted friendly with the group. She was getting to know them, trying to determine if they were trustworthy or not. She hadn't noticed anything yet, and neither had Luke. The group consisted of 3 guys and 3 girls. They had 1 healer among their group, and they were a lot weaker than Luke himself. In fact, their whole group was weaker than Luke's, but it should still be enough to handle a general. That was the plan for the final room. Luke, Red, and Jill would handle the boss while they took care of one of the generals. Nevis and her bodyguard would handle the other general, and once they finished they would help the other team before coming for the boss. It wasn't a complex plan, but they didn't really know what else to expect from the fight. They were in a hallway of the castle, the throne room behind the set of double doors in front of them. The whole building was made of some light brown stone that reminded Luke of sandstone. It wasn't quite the same though, and he didn't understand what it was. It didn't matter though, and they burst through the set of doors. He didn't know what to expect, but this wasn't it. Some creature with long black horns had blood dripping from its mouth. The lord and its generals were dead and being eaten by the monster before them. It radiated a vile power, and sharp yellow eyes scanned over the group. The eyes were angled strangely, seeming to slant downwards from its forehead. As it chewed the food, Luke got a good sight of rows of sharp teeth. The horrifying part was when it closes its mouth, several teeth would punch through its own skin. It cut through its chin and cheeks and a blackish fluid dripped from the wounds. It had a lanky body and stood at twice Luke's height. It was skinny enough that Luke could see the ribs on the creature, but a small potbelly indicated that it had been eating its fill. Sickly white skin covered its body and it contrasted with its black eyes. In an instant it appeared before them, black flames riding down its arm as it swung towards them. Its arm was longer than a whip and swung like one too. The princess's bodyguard blocked the blow, but the flames coalesced on her body. It covered her in the fire in an instant, and she let out a pained yell. That was not a good sign. The creature warped again, appearing behind Jill. It lashed out with a similar attack, but Jill warped away. The attack though hit one of the guys from the other party. The flames repeated the same motion, but he wasn't as resilient as the bodyguard. He fell to the ground in a screaming mess and within a few seconds had died. Luke could see souls and could vaguely tell if someone was alive. He didn't even try to heal the man as Luke forced his body to grow. They needed to lock down the creature. Jill seemed to have the same idea as she impaled the creature's tail with a harpoon. It was a new item that she had picked up while in the dungeon. Like her armor, it took the properties of her magic, which meant that it would distort the space around its target. It slowed them down and prevented teleportation. She learned that the hard way when the monsters had stabbed her with it. It was trapped but still moved a lot faster than Luke expected. Its whole body became covered with flames for a second before it exploded from him. Luke raised his arms to brace for the force. Red stepped behind him. The people whom he was worried about were the other party and the princess who were on the other side of the monster. The fire covered everything, and Luke felt it burning something deeper than just his skin. It was an attack on the soul. Ironically, that made Luke better at dealing with it and he took the brunt of the attack. The bodyguard had recovered and warped in front of the princess, a great shield raised to intercept the attack. A few of the other adventurers had survived but another two had died from the attack. Luke started charging towards the thing as soon as his vision cleared, but the creature had already raised its hand towards him. Black lightning was bouncing between its fingers, and Luke thought he was going to die. Then the lightning contorted and exploded on the creature's hands. It was Jill's attack, though Luke didn't know how that happened. It didn't matter and he reached the monster, punching it with an enlarged fist. Luke heard bones cracking, but it wasn't from the monsters. His hand recoiled from colliding with the creature's own, and he knew that his fingers had been destroyed. The pain was enough to tell him that he had lost in a contest of strength. However, he was only the distraction as a series of other attacks bombarded the creature. Between Jill and himself, they had managed to restrain and distract the creature, giving everyone else an opportunity to attack it. A great shield slammed into the thing's knees, snapping its legs. In the same moment, the blood dripping from the creature's face turned into needles that dug into its eyes. Neva's curse took effect as purple brands started etching themselves into the creature's skin. The remaining adventurers in the other party didn't hold back either. Fueled by the deaths of their friends, they lash out with whatever they could manage. Two swinging swords to cut large gashes in its body, and the last shooting it with an arrow. The creature screamed, and Luke almost lost consciousness from the shout. It felt like his brain was being shaken, and a quick glance told him that almost everyone else had fallen unconscious. Only the bodyguard, and strangely the princess, remained awake. The monster took the opportunity to lash out at Jill and threw a spear of fire at her. She had been the biggest problem for it so far, and Luke knew it. Luke ran to stand in front of her, but he didn't make it. Thankfully her shield was still active, and damage was heavily mitigated. This was bad, and it didn't look like the princess, or the bodyguard was in fighting condition. They managed to stay conscious but barely and were holding their heads in agony. Luke only hesitated for a moment before stepping towards the creature and using his new skill. Even if it disgusted him, he would rather live with that than let Jill get killed. She had lessened the damage but not stopped it and would probably die if he didn't heal her. The creature let out another scream, and Luke's vision went black for a second, but he kept the skill going. When his sight returned, he saw that the creature's body was contorting and collapsing on itself, but it was determined to kill as many people as it could. The fires covered its body again, and Luke knew that this explosion would be bigger than the rest. In a desperate attempt, he tried to push as much power as he could into the skill, trying to empower it with his soul absorption. The creature's soul contorted further and collapsed into Luke's own. He felt the rush of a level up, but also the sickening feeling of gaining undeserved power. Chapter 99, Soul Advancement. Luke P.O.V. Dungeon Ending. Luke felt the power surge into him, far more than he had ever received from a simple level up. Whatever that creature had been, its soul was filled with power. Luke wanted to see what he got from absorbing it, but as soon as he tried, he would be forced to advance his class. Instead, he quickly moved to the others and checked their conditions. He went to Jill first as she had taken an attack head-on, only her armor had kept her alive. Pressing his hand against her, he had to push past the shield that was still active. It was especially good at stopping magic, but also slowed the progress of his hand. Eventually, he managed to push through it, and he was able to check her condition. As he expected, her soul was burned, and badly at that. With his current abilities, he could help but not as much as he would like. He did what he could, healing the wounds on her body and repairing the soul a little. Hopefully, his advancement would let him do more for the soul. Healing the body wouldn't be enough for this wound. Moving through the group, he noticed that almost everyone had sustained minor burns, though only the bodyguard had been burned in a way that matched Jill. It seemed like the heat of the flame had been able to do damage to the soul too, and everyone had some damage. Well, everyone other than himself had been damaged. He was undamaged, even though he had taken the strongest of the flames. He remembered the lightning that Jill managed to block. That had radiated an aura of death, and Luke somehow knew that was not something he could shrug off. Remembering the end of the fight, he was reminded of what he had done to the creature. Bile rose in his throat as he recalled the sickening feeling of crushing the thing's soul. It seemed like most creatures lacked any real defense around their souls, even if they had the ability to attack it. With everyone checked and healed to the best of his ability, Luke tried to wake the bodyguard and read. Even though the bodyguard had suffered the worst attacks and the most burns, she was still the best off. Plus, it seemed like she was healing passively somehow. They got up groggily, though each shook off the feeling in a panic. The bodyguard quickly checked the princess's condition. She's fine. Everyone is for the most part, and if you two can watch me while I advance, I should be able to heal the rest. They nodded and the bodyguard quickly got into a ready position. Luke wasn't expecting another fight but was relieved to see her being so proactive. However, before Luke advanced, something else appeared in front of him. A cloak of some kind appeared folded neatly on the ground. He believed that these items were a part of the class system and not a function of the dungeon. It was a curious thought, and he grabbed the cloak, uncertain of what the item did. He would check it later and placed it into his storage space. There wasn't much room left, as they had filled it with decent quality weapons and armors. He was a little jealous that Mash's item seemed to be growing with him and wished that his did too. He had been jealous of Mash's growth in general, but after the recent incidents, he figured his growth would match or surpass Mash's at this point. Getting back to that fact, he sat down to advance his class. As his mind was carried to within his soul, Luke saw 3 pillars before him. Each pulsed with power. Reaching his hand toward the thickest of the pillars, he appreciated the golden glow it emitted. Divine Soul Paladin, a mix of a healer and fighter, you use your magic to both strike the soul and restore it. Become a paragon of the soul and represent it in its divine nature. There wasn't much information on the class, but the name sounded appealing to him. The thing that surprised him about the class was the implied divinity and the fact that it was a paladin. He thought those only applied to classes related to gods and wondered if the class would bind him to one. Was there some kind of god that was related to the soul? Foreign maybe? However, that made him wonder whether it would be possible to get a class related to a god he didn't know about. He heard about classes related to unknown creatures. In fact, that was one of the methods people used to identify unknown monsters. The class sounded good, but he wasn't going to make a hasty decision. Nobody ever did that, and he would not be the first. Reaching towards the next pillar, he felt a sickness overcome him. It was a deep blue and it radiated with a power opposite to the previous pillar. Still, he chose to learn about the class. Duality Mending Pseudo-Lich, on the borderline between Lich and Saint, your power is both to heal and destroy the soul. Devour the power of those weaker than you. Strengthen others beyond even yourself. One day claim dominion over life and death. Take the path to Liquidum. Luke froze upon reading the class, but not out of fear or disgust. It was pure confusion that wrapped his mind in place. He couldn't comprehend what the class would even do. There were the obvious hints, mentioning an increase in his healing capabilities and offensive magic, but what was the significance of a pseudo-lich? Was that the opposite of a lich, or was it some kind of parallel? He wanted to reject the class reflexively, but he couldn't. It wasn't like Mash's compulsion or anything, instead, it was just a series of images that flashed through his mind. His friends were bound for chaos, and he was on the road with them. There was no doubt in his mind that he would stick with them, and he wanted to always be able to do the most for them. These last 2 dungeons had shown him the power of soul magic, and how it could be needed at times. Even if he was using it to twist and steal souls, he could see the potential in it. If he picked this class, he would be much more capable of protecting his friends. Furthermore, the class even mentioned claiming dominion over life and death. If that could happen, he was certain that his friends would be able to stay safe. Even his family would be safe, and Luke could heal them from just about anything. His instincts told him that this might be necessary, but it was those same instincts that frightened him. If this led him to become a lich in truth, then he was more likely to kill his friends than save them. This was ultimately what pushed him away from the class. The last class was a mix of white and gold, and he reached towards this final pillar. It shone and he felt strange as the information flooded his mind. Holy War Soul Cleric, one who has seen the end of a war and saved the souls of those he reaped. A grim reaper of battle who has stopped the leaders of invasion. You have taken the soul of a demon, you are an avenger of holy magic. Healing your allies and destroying your enemies is the only path of war cleric. This class interested him, but it was not particularly unique. It was very similar to the first class, and it seemed the purpose was the only difference. The first seemed more generic, whereas this seemed more focused on big battles. That wasn't necessarily a bad thing, as it would mean that he would likely get a skill to let him heal and buff from a range. While his individual power was important, he knew that being able to provide more power to his friends would help him climb further. The part about him having taken the soul of a demon was interesting. It must have been the creature he just fought, but it didn't fit the description. From what he knew, a demon should have red skin and be far bulkier, although it did have horns. He would need to check with the guild and update their information if they didn't know. All information on monsters was valuable, and he was eager to add his own. This was one of the only methods of properly identifying monsters, and he was glad for the information. Back to the matter at hand, he had no reason to refuse this class. It was both further along the path he was on, and it would probably only improve his current capabilities. He didn't need to become a dedicated paladin, plus a cleric class would let him level through healing and combat. His mind made up, he chose his class. Power flooded him as he awoke. Everyone was awake now and they were all watching him expectantly. He didn't hesitate in the slightest and thought about his status. Name, Lucas. Class, Holy War Soul Cleric. Level, 5960. Health, 1410/1410. Stamina, 890/890. Mana, 1330/1330. Fortitude, 121 + 2141. Endurance, 79 + 1089. Strength, 98 + 10108. Agility, 89 + 1099. Intelligence, 113 + 2133. Wisdom, 174 + 8254. Charisma, 89. Free stats, 5. Skills, Soul Absorption, Soul Judgment, Soul Mutation, Holy Soul Manifestation, Soul Enhancement, Return to State, Restore Body and Soul, Soul Brands, Divine Soul Marks, Corrupt Distortion, Holy Soul Fire, Strengthened Soul, True Holy Soul, One in Mind and Body, Untouchable Spirit, War Cleric's Bond, Hero's Mentality. Soul Judgment, observe and judge the souls around you. In judging the soul of those you vanquish, you take even greater power from those who are deserving of your judgment. You decide the fates of the souls around you. Holy Soul Manifestation, let your soul manifest around you, shaping it and transforming your body to unbelievable power. Define your own limits. Soul Enhancement, improve their constitution and strengthen them. The bonus is improved based on your belief in them. Plus 50 to 100%. Restore Body and Soul, heal people in their entirety. First, restore their soul, and then heal their body to match. Perfected healing of both their soul and body. Divine Soul Marks, bless the souls you deem worthy. Improve their abilities while gaining them as well. Get a small portion of the benefit you provide. Grows with the person's belief in you. Plus 50-100% increase, you gain 1 to 5% of the power. Corrupt Distortion, stolen from a being of pure evil, you take its ability to crush and twist the soul, and as to be expected, the body will always follow the soul. Only affects creatures with a soul. Holy Soul Fire, stolen from a demonic being, your power redeems it, turning the demonic fire into a holy one. Burn the very souls of your enemies. True holy soul, a chosen soul of divine nature. It emanates with holy power, strengthening the good and condemning the evil. Resist even the evilest attempts to manipulate your soul. One in mind and body, your soul has guided your mind and body to equilibrium. Raising your mental stats will partly increase your physical ones as well. Current ratio, 1/10. Untouchable spirit, your dedication is firm, and your path undaunted. War clerics bond, those you deem allies will be bonded to you. Cast your magic directly upon them from anywhere. So long as the connection is maintained, they are conduits for your magic. Hero's mentality, the chosen path of the hero allows you to resist the temptation of evil. Gain resistance to any effects that would manipulate the mind. Mash's P.O.V present. Mash glared at Luke as he got to his feet. Luke had explained in detail how much he had gained from his advancement, and he couldn't help but be a little jealous. Taking 2 souls had given him so much power so quickly. While that should have been a good thing, it caused Mash to feel a little jealous. Luke had tried explaining that he only gained so many improvements because of the combination of stealing the demon's soul and the advancement together, but it fell on deaf ears. Honestly, even Jill and Red seemed annoyed by Luke's explanation. Both were 3 levels away from their advancement and gave Luke an even colder stare than Mash did. It was unfair. Luke had around 100 more stats than Mash did, and he was 2 levels higher. Even if he allocated his free stats, he would still be far beneath him. That was not to mention that he had 2 skills now that could improve his own stats by 100% each. Luke called himself a healer, but those stats belonged to something far more intimidating. Grumbling to himself, Mash rose to his feet. While he was a little disgruntled by the difference, he knew that they each had their strengths and weaknesses. Honestly, he was glad that Luke had the skills to overcome the lack of training that they did, and he hoped that Jill would get one as well. Red already had one, so only Jill lacked a way to make up the difference in training. Apparently, skills like that are common among those that level quickly. The class system wanted to help those that are striving for improvements. Let's spar a bit. I got a few things I want to try. Mash grinned as he said the words to Luke and received one himself. Luke was just as eager as Mash to test his new abilities. Thinking about it, Mash wanted to spar with his brother too. He could do that after though. Chapter 100, Tournament Villain. Mash stood in the training grounds with Luke staring back at him. Slowly the fur that had grown on his body receded back into his skin. He was surprised when the fur grew on his face, as the creature he had fought had a truly human face. He was happy to see what it provided him, the biggest surprise being the pair of wings. Well, he guessed the transformations weren't perfect since he didn't grow wings in his dragon form or a beak in his Priscilla form. After the fight with the humanoid cat monster, Mash had been eager to test the new form. The training ground wasn't big enough to utilize them, but the tournament arena would be big enough. Honestly, the transformation had its benefits, though he had only barely managed to win the fight against Luke. However, Luke was at a bigger disadvantage in spars than Mash was. Though that was because he refused to use any of his offensive magic against his friends. It made sense since none of them could block or deal with attacks to their souls. It was similar to why Mash wouldn't use his dragon form or imitation skills. Those weren't really fitting for a spar. Mash did however try his newly gained form, which he proudly dubbed the winged cat form. His friends scoffed at his naming sense, but Mash didn't really care since it was easy to remember. It had raised his stats a bit, but the skill didn't tell him what any of the transformations did exactly. When Luke buffed himself, he was stronger than Mash even after the transformation. Although Mash was able to keep up with Luke's movements. It wasn't that he was much faster than Luke, rather Mash had gained a new sense that seemed to give him a tiny bit of foresight. It wasn't like he could see the future, instead he was able to see the intentions of the person he was fighting. Mash guessed that if he didn't have an unusually high number of mental defenses, he would have lost to the monster. The Colosseum must have been gauging his weakness, and hopefully, they would cross mental attacks off their list now. The fight had been more chaotic than Mash had expected. Luke seemed to manifest a golden aura around him, and he could shape it freely too. It was apparently like his wooden imitation skill, though it didn't give him as many benefits. Plus, it was more like thick armor instead of gaining a new body. Mash wasn't that worried about harming Luke and needed to take full advantage of his lightning and wood to damage him with that armor. The only reason Mash ended up winning was his unusually high energy pool. Simply put, his energy was far superior to regular mana, and Luke had run out of mana before Mash ran out of energy. Mash couldn't really do any significant damage to him without trying for lethal attacks, and there was no chance he was going to risk that. Mash stood on a rising platform. Today was the day of the tournament, and he was eagerly waiting for his next fight to start. His opponent today was a beastman assassin. He had won all of his previous fights in a single attack, ending the fights without revealing much. Mash was excited for the fight since it would be a good opportunity to test his new form. His current plan was to hide the dragon form, for as long as possible, and was eager to get some combat testing in with his new form. Mash did have one concern, but he didn't know if that would show today. He still wasn't sure if his hunt skill would work for the tournament. It worked in fights to the death, which was great, but it didn't work in the spars he had done. He guessed that the skill worked around his intentions, but he couldn't make himself treat these matches as life and death struggles. As he breached the arena, Mash looked over to the cloaked man on the other side. Mash chose to wear brighter colors today even if it did clash with his hair and eyes. Everyone had recommended he do so, and so he was wearing a blue shirt that had been custom tailored. It looked like he was wearing water, with small fishes depicted across his chest. This didn't have his family's emblem, but the design was still immaculate. It did particularly well in contrast with the dull black robes of the other man. Mash assumed that there were hundreds of knives hidden beneath them, and quickly activated his own skill. Fur crept over his skin as armor quickly started forming around his body. Before his armor could fully form, he felt an object suddenly appear within his draconic domain, though he reacted quickly. The improved reflexes and ability to read intentions were probably the biggest benefit of the transformation, and he was easily able to grab the dagger as soon as it appeared. It had been a teleportation skill of some kind, though it felt different from Jill's magic. He guessed it wasn't true teleportation, and likely a skill that straddled the line. As if to confirm Mash's theory, the man vanished a second later, though Mash had no blind spots and caught the arm that appeared behind him. Wood quickly climbed across his hand and trapped the assassin with him. Mash was surprised to notice that the hand was smaller than his but brushed it off as another 3 daggers appeared within his mana sense. Mash used the assassin as a shield for one while blocking the other 2 by reinforcing the armor around his arm to intercept them. They passed through his armor, stabbing into his arm without striking the armor itself. Grunting from the pain, Mash was glad to hear a scream of pain from the assassin too. It was a lot higher pitch than he expected, and it clicked into place that the assassin was a girl. It didn't really matter, and he was surprised at how misleading her armor was. Was that intentional? While his arm did sting from the pain, having daggers cleaning stab into his arm wasn't as painful as he expected. Not hesitating in the slightest, Mash swung the girl roughly, slamming her face first into the ground. His armor grew as he fell on top of her. A small crunching noise could be heard as the spikes he grew from the front of his armor and the added weight crushed her body. He managed to do some real damage, though he had separated from his armor and dodged soon after. More daggers appeared behind Mash, and he didn't hesitate in dislodging himself from the armor and rolling out of the way. His arm stung more now, the daggers having twisted when he rolled across the ground. Mash felt the pain lessen as something activated to diminish it. It seemed like the threshold for the skill to take effect had risen and allowed him to feel more pain now. The assassin rose to their feet. Her thicker robes had been cut and ruined from the wooden spikes, but it seemed like she had some enchanted leather armor that didn't get pierced. It was probably designed to be good against blades, though that didn't do much against the weight of his blows, or her own daggers. Getting a good look at her, Mash realized she was a member of the Night Clan. She had the telltale reddish-brown hair and pointed ears that were known about them. He understood why everyone called them foxes when insulting them. However, he cared little for her appearance, focusing on the dozens of daggers strapped to her body. Now he understood why he thought that she was a man. The daggers completely covered her body, completely changing the outline of her body. Honestly, that was a pretty good strategy to hide weapons. His appreciation went unnoticed, as the girl appeared beside him once again, this time forming another 3 daggers in the air around Mash. She staggered her attacks, the daggers seeming to appear at random timings. If not for his improved reflexes, draconic domain, and foresight, he wouldn't be able to block the attacks. Even now he didn't try blocking them, instead, dodging them and striking at the wrist of the girl. She parried his blow by lowering her swinging hand, and his palm roughly struck the hilt of a dagger. It hurt, but he was glad it wasn't the blade. She was slightly shaken by his strength too, and he quickly followed up with a blow to her gut. She was definitely faster than Mash was originally, but his new transformation actually let him match her speed. She clearly had some skills for sudden boosts, but they were still within the range of his reactions. Though she didn't have the defense or strength to match him, his blow did a lot more damage than her daggers could. This time he heard some ribs break as her armor dented inwards. She was coughing up blood as she rolled across the ground. It was a fast reaction to lessen the force of his blow, but it also stretched the wound itself. She shakily got to her feet, and she glared at him. Black pupils surrounded by a yellow fire seemed to look at him with unending anger. Mash could only look back in confusion, as she spat some blood to the ground. It was clear the fight was over at this point, and he was shocked to hear her yell at him. "Hey, bastard! What's the big idea? Why aren't you using your lightning or snake summons? You trying to piss people off by beating them at what they're supposed to be good at? Bragging about everything your class can do?" Mash was surprised to hear her start a tirade but realized that the fight was over as her breathing became more ragged. After yelling, she got into a coughing fit before collapsing. The healers arrived quickly, and this time, Mash was the one that looked on in stunned silence. That couldn't possibly be true. He thought about his fights thus far and realized that she was telling the truth, though not for the right reasons. He had wanted to test his new abilities and compare them with people that would provide a good challenge. Somehow, that had turned into him beating a sound mage with overwhelmingly fast magic, and a summoner by simply summoning more things. Now, he had just beaten her with his speed and reflexes, rather than any of his other abilities. Mash wanted to smack himself in the forehead but settled for quickly shuffling to the moving platforms. He kept his transformation up as the fur made it easier to hide his embarrassment. How could he accidentally act like an arrogant asshole? He quickly became the villain of the tournament and was planning on continuing to do the same for the rest of his fights. Honestly, he was using the tournament to gauge where his different transformations and abilities landed, and that meant that he would continue to humiliate his opponents. Maybe he could start ending his fights without holding back, and hopefully, that would be enough to ease their anger. It was the best place to truly test his abilities after all. Where else could he find such a diverse group of adventurers that would fight him seriously? "It is fine, you are merely showing them that they are not your equal." Mash expected the reaction but didn't expect to hear Priscilla's words. The message was sent to his mind, but it was given to him like she was speaking, and he could have sworn he heard the sarcasm in her tone. Had she been practicing acting sarcastic and communicating that sarcasm? Really? Somehow, this had been the most stunning revelation of the day, and he laughed as the platform descended from the arena. Despite knowing it would only make his image worse, he couldn't stop it. It had been forced out of him and realized that he would be glad to play the villain.